Okay, so this is the introduction to Illustrator. Let's get started. So when we open it up and we go to File New, this section should be really familiar. If you change the number of artboards, you're going to have multiple areas to work in, and they can be exported separately. This can actually be really helpful if you want to work on 3 different versions of something and then kind of export them and sort of decide. It allows them to keep separate but be viewed all at the same time. It's great if you're creating like a wedding suite or something where you have 3 different pieces of the same type of stationery and they're just different sizes. So if you do that, you can actually change the sizes and move them around. In this case, you're really probably only going to need 1, and you can work on separate layers. You can change your units here and your size here, or you can select from some common sizes as well. So I'm going to use letter size. I'm going to keep it horizontal. I'm going to leave all of this advanced information the same. You can, of course, change this. So if you want your raster effects or your photos, should you import those to be a different size, you can select that here. And you can also change your color mode if you're doing something for web or print. However, in this case, leave that as it is, leave this as it is, and just worry about your size here. I'm going to click OK. It's going to pop this up here. And now I'm going to walk you quickly through the tools, and then I'm going to start showing you how they all work. So we have our selection tool, should be the same in Photoshop, allows you to grab objects. Your direct selection tool allows you to manipulate the points on those vector objects. So let me draw you out a rectangle and show you what happens when you do that. So your fills and your stroke colors are right here. You can swap them if you have an object selected. So if I take the direct selection tool, I can then manipulate this shape by grabbing the points and changing it. So this is kind of the nice thing. You're sort of almost working as if you're working with sort of puzzle pieces in this program. So this allows you to manipulate shapes and kind of adjust them in different ways. If you click and hold, it will allow you to toggle down and view any options for your tool. So in this case, I'm going to leave it as is. But that is how the direct selection tool is used. The magic wand tool allows you to select like objects. So for example, let me take this weird arrow I made. I'm going to scale it down holding shift and drag. And I'm going to hold down option and I'm going to click and drag, and it will allow me to create multiples of that object. So I'm going to make a few of these. And then I'm going to change the color of a couple by clicking and holding shift to grab 3. I have a variety of different color palettes over here. I'm just going to go to the color guide palette, change the color. And then if I wanted to, let's say I had hundreds of these on my infographic or somewhere, I can use the magic wand to select like objects. So I can click this and it will grab all of the tan colored ones. If you want to change the way it's selecting the object, so if you say I want you to select objects that are purple but don't have a stroke, let's say you have purple objects with a stroke and without, you should be able to double click and it will bring up the magic wand, and you can tell it how to select the objects. So you can say fill color, or stroke weight. So like if I had objects that had a whole bunch of different ways that they were viewed, I could have them select by both fill color and stroke color. So that way, if I select that, pop that up here, and then I come back and I replicate a few more of these. But these ones I give a purple stroke by clicking on my stroke, or maybe pink. I'll make it bigger so you can really see it too. So I want it to select objects that look like this, not just all of these. If I do that, when I select, you'll notice it looks for both the stroke and the fill color, so it will only grab those similar objects. This may not seem super important now, but as you're building this graphic, you may have multiples of similar things, and being able to select them quickly to change colors and adjust will be really helpful. So in the same way, I can select them like this. If I turn off stroke color, and then I click, you'll notice it selects all of them because it's only selecting them by their fill color. So Magic Wand works a little differently. It doesn't select negative space areas the way it does in Photoshop, but it's still a really, really useful tool, and you can even add more parameters if you really want to get specific about your selections. So that is the Magic Wand. So this one here is the Lasso Tool. I don't really use this. I mean, I'm not really sure how I would necessarily use that. I'm sure there's some really sensible ways, and anyone who's a professional and watches this video will be like, what? But I don't use it, so skip that tool. The pen tool, however, is incredibly useful once you get used to it. The first time you use the pen tool, you're going to hate the pen tool. It does exist in Photoshop and works exactly the same way. However, you probably haven't used it too often. You may have used it to make selections, and that's you sort of can use it this way too, but you don't really work with selections that way. Instead, you're going to be creating shapes. So if I grab this and I'm going to set a stroke color, and I'm going to delete all my little triangles here because I don't need them anymore. I'm now on pink. The reason it turned to pink is because that was the last object I selected. And then I can draw. So you basically are just going to click and drag. The trick to using the pen tool is making sure that the handles point in the direction you want to go. So if I want to go over here and I click, you'll notice instead of a straight line, it creates a curve. It's trying to create the path of least resistance. So now you may or may not use this. I just kind of want you to know about it. There's a lot of different ways you can use this. The pen tool is actually the bread and butter of Illustrator. It's a great tool, but depending on how complex your data visualization is, you may never need it. You may only use the shape panel, but do be aware that that is there. Under its toggle, there's a lot of different features that you can use to interact with your pen tool created objects, such as the Add Anchor Point tool, which will allow you to add anchors, which will then allow you to manipulate it with the direct selection arrow. So you can go back and make changes here. So that's a very ugly blob, but you get the point. You can click and hold and then select. You can also remove anchor points by clicking on them. And you can also convert them between handled points and straight points. So you can actually make them into angular points. Or you can take angular points and redraw handles. So the pen tool takes a long time to really master, I feel like, but it's easy to kind of grasp what it does. It creates these wonderful vector shapes that can be blown up to anything. So if you actually want to create something that looks like the object in your infographic, then you may be able to use the pen tool for that. Let's say you need to trace a piece of a map or kind of make some different shapes. This is a great way to work with that. Set that back to pen tool. We have our type tool, similar to how it works in Photoshop, except for one thing. There's two ways to create type in Illustrator. The first is to drag out a box. That seems like the obvious one. Then you can type and you can do whatever. I'm going to copy and paste a lot of things so you can kind of see what happens here. I can then grab this box, move it around. I can change the shape and the text will flow, and it's kind of pretty straightforward. The second way to create type is to just click. Now watch what happens when I do this. So good. If I then try and manipulate this, it will actually scale and manipulate the type. So this is called point text versus this is area text. So just something to know. So if you find you're like trying to resize the box and you're like, oh my goodness, why is this changing sizes? Why is it moving? You just created the wrong type of text, and you simply need to just instead draw out a box and grab your content and put it back in the box. It's kind of hard to click in the boxes sometimes. Ooh. See if I can get it. And then it's sort of trying to paste it weird, but you get the point. So there's two ways to create text. So if it gets weird, you just made it the wrong way, try the other way. Hopefully you won't need to do too much complex text. The main thing you'll probably be doing is drawing out text boxes for your labels. That should be something that you guys can totally access. So the Paintbrush tool seems like the perfect tool, and it's actually very useful, but unless you have a tablet, it's not going to be helpful. I have a tablet right here. So what's nice is I can actually sort of draw. I can even go into my strokes panel or my brush panel and create calligraphic style brushes that actually will change angles, or I can create a new brush here and give it pressure-based variation. So it's actually really useful for tablets in that I can create thin and thick strokes, and actually I do a lot of my own personal illustration work here because I have a lot of freedom over how the brushes work. And then I can always come back in and manipulate, which is so nice in comparison to Photoshop. Photoshop, when you write with that brush tool, is on there. It just flattens into that layer. Not so with the Illustrator brush tool. You have to kind of work at getting your brushes the way you want, but you can add, some really nice stroke effects. You can adjust them by double-clicking your brushes. You can make a lot of manipulations. There's some really great uses for it, so just keep it in mind. But it's really most effective with a tablet, and it's going to be problematic if you try and do it with like a trackpad, so just be aware. So that's the brush tool. The pencil tool works incredibly similarly, and then you can sort of apply brushes. There's some basic differences in how it works, but I'm not going to get into them because in most cases on your basic level, you'd be using the brush over the pencil. So that's that. The Blob Brush is another tool that you may think is exactly what you want, but isn't always. It's basically a way to fill things in. So when you work with the Blob Brush, unlike the paintbrush, it creates a shape instead of a stroke. So if I take the brush tool and I do that same scribble, and I click on it, you can see it's still a stroke, so it's linear. Versus the blob brush, this is now a solid object. There's not a bunch of squiggles moving through it. You can come back with the eraser and like cut pieces out of it, or you can come back with the blob brush and refill pieces in. So it's basically, this creates shapes, this creates lines. Without a tablet, these 4 tools are not super useful. Yes, question?
Say you were like drawing a person, you drew like the hair out and you wanted to fill it in. Like, would that stay within the lines of the path, or would you have to like select it first and then fill it with the blob? Or
it's a hard call because you could fill it in that way, and you're watching as you paint, so you would just put it behind your line work.
Yeah.
A lot of times I will draw out the shape for the hair with the pen tool instead of trying to use the blob brush, because it will take me so much longer to fill in with the blob brush and I may miss little points that I would rather just draw the shape and then use my slice tool to cut it apart. I'll show you a cool video about how to do inking, and I'll actually show you a couple of my files about how I've created illustrations in Illustrator, which I think will help you understand how I use these tools a little better. So I'll actually show you what that looks like shortly. So these 4 are really mostly useful if you have a tablet. Under the eraser, there's a cool tool called the knife tool, which is kind of neat. So watch this. If I draw out a square, I'm going to make it a color so it's a little less jarring to look at. You can see I accidentally added it to the stroke. I can turn off the stroke by bringing it forward and setting it to none. If I go under the eraser tool and I grab the knife tool, I can actually cut shapes apart. So that's kind of a neat feature, as I can now make them into puzzle pieces and break them apart. So the eraser tool does have some uses, like the scissors tool. What you do is you actually click the edges and you cut from edge to edge. So it works kind of like scissors, versus the knife allows you to cut more freeform. These 4 really are kind of tablet dependent, but they're awesome tools. They're kind of my main things that I use in Illustrator other than the pen. This is the rotate tool. Pretty obviously, if you grab something and you want to rotate it, usually you can just hover over the corner, but if you're having trouble, you can grab the rotate tool and just grab it from any point and rotate it. This is called the scale tool. So once again, you can grab it from any point and scale, but it also allows you to sort of manipulate in a transformative way, which may or may not be what you want. Of course, you can easily just come to the bounding box and scale that way as well. So you have some kind of freedom there. And holding shift, of course, will keep shapes the shape they are. This is the width tool. I don't usually mess with that. Free transform. If you grab that, it allows you to kind of play with stuff. I really don't feel any need for these 2. Don't worry about the shape builder. That might confuse you. And if you accidentally can click the perspective grid, because this will probably happen to you, and then you go somewhere and you're like trying to exit the perspective grid, just come back to the perspective grid and hit the X here. So you probably don't need the perspective grid. I wouldn't worry about it. This is the mesh tool. I don't mess with that. The gradient tool, however, may be really useful for you, especially if you're trying to create a data visualization that goes from like color to color. So you may think that what you do is you just sort of click on an object and it'll make the vector have a gradient, you can adjust it. No, it actually has a secondary panel, and we're going to go into the panels in a moment. But to work with this tool, you actually have to come to the gradient panel and build your gradient first. So what you can do is actually just drag the main gradient over onto it. I accidentally dragged it to the stroke instead of the fill. So let me turn that off and come back to my fill. And then I have my gradient here. I can just double click these and change the colors, or click them once, grab different colors, or manipulate them one way or the other. So I can get kind of whatever color I want. Likewise, to create additional areas in the gradient, you just click. It will make it exactly that color, and you can push it around, or you can double click and adjust however you want to. You can do this as well. Let's make it that. And then I can change it to a radial gradient or a linear gradient. Now the gradient tool comes in as that when I select this, I can now manipulate my gradient on the object, which is really kind of unique to Illustrator, but is actually incredibly helpful. So you can actually redraw the gradient and change it. And let me show you another way that this tool might be useful. So let's say I have a variety of these objects, and they all have the gradient applied, but I want the gradient to go all the way across all of them. That's really easy to do. All I have to do is grab them, take the gradient tool, and drag it across. So as long as I have them all selected, I can play with it. So I know I'm going kind of quick, but hopefully being able to go back to the video, you can just go find the area in the video where I go over something you need and come back to it. So the gradient tool is really easy. Just remember you will also need to make use of the gradient panel. If you want to save a gradient you've created, you simply have to open your Swatches panel, which I don't think I have up, so I'm going to go to Window, Swatches. And you can drag your gradient over to the Swatches panel, and then you won't lose it, and you can always reuse this gradient later. So if I change these all to be green and I go, oh no, I wanted to use that gradient, I can always come back and select that from my panel. So this is the Swatches panel. It looks like a bunch of swatches, and I'm going to try and drag it over and just add it to that toolbar there. So now all my colors are together. So I have my swatches, I have my color blender, and I have my color guide. So the color guide will just give you shades and tints of the same color, which could be really useful for you in your infographic if you want to sort of just show things within a shade and kind of have them work their way down. So if the darkness of the color is significant in some way, you can play with that as well. So gradient tool. Eyedropper does just what you would think it would do. It works just like Photoshop. You click, it pulls the color up. That's about it. And you can, but something to note is unless you're going over a photograph, when you pick up the color, it will pick up the actual color that's applied, which in this case is the full gradient. It won't grab that little intermediary purple. It grabs the full color. So that's, I guess, the only difference. The blend tool is kind of interesting. I wouldn't get too crazy with this, but this might actually help you out. So the blend tool, as it's called, W, if I select an object and I want to blend it to this object, I can just click another object and it will magically transform them into one another. This can be useful for your data visualizations in that you can actually blend color and shape, and in a variety of ways. So I will show this. So let's say I have this, and then I also have a square. I'm going to try and line those up by dragging up. You can see it's going to kind of give me a guide. I'm going to change the color of this using my Swatches panel. And now I'm going to use my blend tool. So this can kind of create some of your infographic elements automatically for you, which is kind of nice. So if I grab this, grab my blend tool, and then click this next one. So I should have to click this one first. And then if it will let me select it, which it doesn't want to in this moment. Come here. Okay. There we go. So for some reason it wouldn't let me do it the other way. It will blend them into one another. But something that's really cool is if I sort of adjust the blend here, I should be able to double click the blend tool. I can actually have it do it in specified steps as well. So it will do it in steps, which can be really nice because as I move this, you can see I could space them out and I can actually have different points here so they become individual shapes. If I click the object again and I double click my blend, I could maybe make it 5 steps. And that way, I'm able to create visualizations automatically, magically using the blend tool. So if, let's say, that color represents one thing and shape represents another, these could be intermediary steps that are kind of like 50-50 and things like that. So the blend tool actually may be really helpful for you. It's pretty easy to use. You just turn the blend tool on, grab the object, and grab the other object, and it should blend them. So you can blend a lot of different things too, and there's some cool ways you can use it, such as this. So let me show you kind of a neat one. If I grab kind of an ellipse and I switch it to stroke, I know you can't probably see that peach incredibly well on this projector, so I'll make it dark. Let's make it this deep burnt wine color, I guess. You can actually snap it to a spine. This is kind of a little more advanced, but I'll show you this anyway. If you need me to re-go over this at a later date, I will. But you can actually grab things and snap them to spines as well. So I just made a spine for this. I'm going to change the color of this to something completely different, like green. And I'm going to set these here, and I'm going to blend them. So I'm going to grab that, blend to this. Come here. I don't know why it never wants to let me grab it. There we go. Come on. I think I might need to just select them both. It's being irritating. Ah, yes, to have a video immortalized where I suddenly cannot get the blend tool to work. Oh my goodness. I love how I just do it and then it doesn't want to blend. Will it blend? Okay. No. Alright, well, welcome to the problematic issue of the blend tool. It should. I'm in isolation mode now, so it's not going to work. There's probably some Stupid thing I'm not doing. Okay, yay, blend tool is not functional today. But technically I should be able to take this, grab this object, and snap it to a spine using the blend tool. So I should be able to, think it's, you know what, I completely forgot where it is. It should be right here, blend, replace spine, and it will actually blend along a shape. So I'm going to go back into the blend tool. I don't know why today I'm having trouble collecting them. Personally, I don't use the blend tool. I just grab the objects and I go to object, blend, make. And that's probably why I can't do it today. So if you can't figure it out, it's right there. You can blend them and you can have them snap to different shapes. So you can actually use them even as typographic shapes. So if I had a circle like this and I wanted to blend some smaller circles around the circle and I wanted them to actually scale and change color, I can do that pretty easily here. Instead of using the blend tool, I'm just going to go to object, blend, make. Just works better for me. Blend, make. It's going to do that. I can double click. I can still double click this blend and change the amount of steps. So I want it to have 60 steps. I'm going to click OK. It's going to make this cool shape. And then I'm going to select both shapes. And I'm going to go to object, blend, replace spine. And it will create these really neat shapes. So this is something you should really just probably play with if you want to get into the blend tool. There's a lot of ways you can do these things without that, where we can do the transform, and I'll show you that as well. But these are kind of the unique elements that might really help you make your data visualizations quickly and easily. So someone, I'm sure, will comment on my video telling me I'm an idiot because I didn't use the blend tool right. But anyway, I don't use the symbol sprayer. Skip that. Don't worry about the column graph tool. Don't worry, Artboard tool you won't need unless you have multiple artboards. Slice tool, don't mess with that either. That's actually for web. You would think that's a knife that helps you cut your shapes. No, it's the wrong thing. Hand tool just allows you to move your artboard around. You can use the space bar. And then the zoom tool, for once, works exactly like Photoshop. It's just zooming in, zooming out. That's it. So those are all the tools. Let me quickly show you the panels. I know this is so much information at once, but hopefully you can go back through it. Transform panel is probably the most important panel, and let me give you a little bit more of a demo on this. I'm going to drag the panel out so you can see all three parts of it. So within the transform panel, and I just separated them, there's three panels. There's transform, align, and Pathfinder. These are going to make a big difference in your ability to create a nice infographic, and let me show you why. So let's say I create a variety of red circles, and they're everywhere. They're all over the place. Now, let's say I want those to be in a line. Now, your instinct is going to be to do this. And sit there and hand line them up. Don't do that. Come to your panel, go to your align section of the panel, and then you can actually select what they're aligning to. In this case, it's aligned to selection, which is fine. And you can just tell them to be centered. Or you can tell them to line up vertically. Or you can tell them to distribute horizontally or align vertical centers. So do not go through the effort of hand dragging things all over the place. You can actually just kind of use this panel, which is really helpful. So let's say that I know my farthest one is over here and my other farthest one should be over here. All I have to do is grab these and I can actually vertically align them like this, and I can tell them to evenly space themselves by saying horizontal, distribute, center, and they're now evenly spaced. So this could actually be the start of a data visualization. Each of these bubbles could be a different amount, and this could be over time. So I can make this a timeline, so like day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, and that's already a visualization over time. So that's a really easy one to work with. Play with those. You can also tell them to align to the artboard as well. So you can have them, like if you want it to be centered, like let's say I grab all these, zoom out a little bit, and I hit Command G to group them so they're now one thing. I can always ungroup them, and I want it to be centered on the artboard. All I have to do is change align to artboard and hit center, and it will center them. So play with that. You really kind of got to experience it to understand it. That's the align panel. The Pathfinder is really great. I'm going to show you that as well. So if we go to Pathfinder, something that's kind of cool is if I wanted this to actually be one object instead of individual circles, I can fuse them together. So let me show you some of the basics of how this works. So if I have two circles and they overlap, let's say I wanted to make like a cloud or some shape, cloud shape, and this is my cloud. I could of course just group them, or I could make them into one shape. So by highlighting all of them and then selecting unite, bam, they become one shape. Really, really easy. This is like, for some reason I've even had designers not know this at this level. So The Pathfinder is amazing. I can actually go the opposite way. So let's say I want to make a moon shape, and I want this shape to exist. I can grab them, and I can say minus front, and it will slice the piece out of it. So you can actually create tons of beautiful, simple little illustrations by literally playing with circles and squares. Like, it's really very easy. So, you know, this may play into your data. Like, my example for the research was kitty cats or kittens. It may be kind of hard for you to draw a kitten if you, 1, don't have the drawing skills, 2, are not familiar with Illustrator, and 3, basically those 2 are enough, so I don't even need to give you a third option. But you could pick something simple, so like weather data might be a good example because it's really easy to make moons and suns and clouds and rain droplets in this program. So pick something that's kind of, if you want to go really visual with it, pick something that's within your range of ability to create the images. Now, that being said, you could always take the pen tool and trace a kitten, but it's going to be a little harder than you think if you aren't really familiar with how to use all these pieces. So once again, let's see what kind of other shapes we can make with our Pathfinder. We can actually, you know, subtract circles out of circles, and then there's some more here. So let's say I want to use the shape, like I want to make this little Venn diagram centerpiece. I can do that here by using intersect, and it will take the shape that they intersect. Go the same way, I can do it the opposite way. So you can see each of these functions slightly differently. So these are all really, really helpful and useful for your shapes. You can also use slightly more complex ones down here in the Pathfinders. If I hit divide, it will break them all apart without deleting any of the shapes. So now I have 3 pieces, and I can use them. So this could easily become representative of something else. I could build something, that's a bull, it could be Taurus, I don't know, maybe it's astrological signs, and you create some really cute little graphics that way. There's a lot of ways you can use them, and you can sort of interlace. So you can divide them apart, fuse them back together, move them around, group them, change their colors, do all kinds of different stuff. One thing that should be noted is if you do fuse them, all the colors will become one color. So if I grab, they're grouped right now, so I'm going to ungroup them by just clicking that. And then I change the colors. Oops, double clicked too fast. If I fuse them, they will all become one color. So that's worth noting. So in some cases, you're better off grouping the shapes than you are fusing them. They will not maintain their individual colors. So you can kind of move them around. And then, like, if I can't get these little horns, quote unquote, even, once again, I can go right to align them. In this case, it's selected Artboard. That's why they moved so much. So I got to go to align to selection, align them. Now they're perfectly aligned. I can group these and then center them on this bull shape, and they should center. So it's actually, there's a lot you can do basically. Like the Pathfinder along with the shape tool is enough for you to create this entire visualization, I promise you. You got to play with it, so I would spend some time today, let that be part of your research. Play with it, make some shapes, build some things, explore Illustrator. There's a lot of ways you may end up being able to use this in your photography later. It's especially helpful for creating certain types of masks, clipping things out, adding text, all of that. I really prefer using this program for anything like that over Photoshop, especially if you ever want to print your photos really, really big. You're not going to have rastered text that's going to get weird. So one cool thing about photos, let me show you for my photographers something that can be really helpful and really neat. So I'm going to go get a photographic texture, and this is maybe a way you could incorporate your photographs. I'm going to get like wave texture, and I'm going to show you how you might use a photograph in a really cool way. Oh, that sand one was cool. Let me grab that one. I'm going to view image. For my designers, I do not have a problem with you collecting photography from the internet. Keep track of where you're getting things, but free use because you're students, there's a disclaimer on that. You just got to make sure if you ever put it in your portfolio, you put the right disclaimer, but you are allowed to use these things under the educational laws of life, so to speak. So I'm just going to save that to my desktop, and I'm going to place this photo in. So I could copy and paste it in. I don't like to do that. I like to just place them in. So File, Place. Anyone who's ever used InDesign, and the photographers may have used that to create some photo books at some point, will understand that when you place an object, it maintains its link to the original object. So if I went and changed this photo in Photoshop, like if I change the color there, it will update here. So you need to make sure you keep things where they need to be. I'm going to scale that down, and I'm going to show you something really cool that you can do with this that may allow you to kind of really play with your photography more than your Illustrator skills. I'm going to grab this little bar here. I'm going to go to my Pathfinder, and I'm going to fuse it together. It is now one shape. I'm then going to bring it over top of the photo. Now, right now it's behind, so what I need to do is click whatever I want to move. So I'll take the photo, hit arrange, send to back. So now it's behind that. Now watch what I can do with this. That's really cool. So clipping masks in Photoshop work a little differently. In Illustrator, you need to use vectors like cookie cutters to cut your photos. So if I grab both objects, right mouse click and hit make clipping mask, I can clip my photos into these vector shapes, which can be so useful and cool. So you can really play with texture. So you could take your photographs of the objects or whatever and clip them into these really, really simple shapes and use that in a manipulative way. So you could even go into Photoshop, colorize different photos, use parts, clip them out, and do all kinds of cool stuff with them that way. Now, one thing that should be noted is if you try and do that, I'm gonna place that photo again and show you something that you may do on accident that won't work. So huge. Okay, scale that down, bring that back. So let's say, oh good Lord. Okay, so let me bring this back. Let's say I want to cut out a variety of circles at different points on the photograph. So maybe the photograph itself is part of the visualization and my circles are cut out of different spaces on the photograph where like the colors kind of affect. So maybe it's like a night sky data visualization and I'm like focusing on different parts of the night sky. I'm going to bring this forward because I have it selected, bring to front. That did not work, so I will move this back instead. Arrange, send to back. I think my circle's invisible, that's why. Okay, let me grab a color for it. And let's say I want to grab different parts of the photograph that are different shades. So I'm just option dragging to make these slightly different. I'm going to maybe change the scale, so maybe that's kind of part of the visualization, but maybe it goes dark to light and there's some elements here. Now, if I highlight all of these objects and I right mouse click and hit make clipping mask, it's not going to work. It's only going to clip one. The way I can fix this, and you will probably forget this, but it will be in the video, is that by grabbing all of these shapes that I want to be part of the mask, I can try and fuse them, but they're not overlapping, so that may or may not work. Sometimes that works, and now maybe it'll work. Okay, so that did not work the way I wanted. Just undo it. You can Command Z forever in Illustrator. That's the one nice thing. Instead, I need to grab these objects and go to Object, Compound Path, Make. This took me about a billion years to figure this out because no one ever told me about it, but now that they are compound path, it's viewing them as one shape even though they're not touching. Now if I right mouse click and make clipping mask, it will function. So that's the key of clipping masks. So you could definitely use your photo and the color and shading of your photography to be the main meat of your data visualization and then just play with some shapes and type in Illustrator. But that should really be kind of the main stuff you need to know. There are lots of other things in Illustrator you can do, like you can add drop shadows, you can manipulate transparency using the transparency panel. There's a lot of things you can do, but I'm going to probably maybe get to some of that next time. What I want you to do for this video, since we've already done probably a 30-minute video here, is I want you to focus on playing with your shapes and playing with your Pathfinder. So if you can't find it over here, all you have to do is go to Window, Pathfinder. It will pop it up. You'll have your transform panel, which will allow you to grab things and scale them and rotate them by actual numbers. And then also your align panel and your Pathfinder. So pull that up, play with, filling the colors, making the shapes. One thing that should be noted that I may not have said is if you click and hold here, there's a variety of different shapes you can make. And then the Polygon Tool is even cooler because when you click it, if you just click once instead of drag, you can tell it how many ends on the polygon to have. So if you need to make a dodecahedron, you can make one. If you want to make a triangle, you hit 3, and it will let you start making triangles. Those are all invisible because they have no fill, so they're kind of hiding. But I think I got them there. But there they are. So play around, manipulate, see what you can kind of do with that Pathfinder and kind of build some illustrations and shapes. Clip some photos, see how that looks. Play around with that. So that's kind of where I'm going to end today. There's on the Illustrator demo, there's a lot more, but hopefully in time you'll find ways to really make Illustrator a part of your photographic practice and see some really neat things you can do and manipulate within your photography that way. It's a great way to use it in logo development, in things for web. There should be a lot of cool stuff you can do in here. So that being said, that is the end of that. When you save, just save it as an Illustrator file. You can also save it as an EPS or even a PDF. So I will save it as Illustrator and then title it. So there. If you want to make it a JPEG, like if you're ready to export, the last thing you would need to know is go to File, export. Different than Photoshop, you can't file save as a JPEG. You got to export and tell it to be a JPEG and to use your artboard shape. And then you click export, select whatever you want there, and then you have your finalized image there. So that is that, and that's the end of the video.